Look at the slice of white bread in the modern supermarket aisle. It is perfectly square. It is impossibly soft. It stays soft for weeks, defying the natural laws of decay. This object is not food. This object is a chemical foam, a structural lattice of starch and gluten that has been engineered for shelf life, not for human digestion. The modern consumer eats this industrial sponge and wonders why the stomach swells. The modern consumer feels the lethargy creep into the limbs an hour after a meal. The modern consumer is told that gluten is the enemy, that wheat is the poison, that the human body has suddenly, after 10,000 years, forgotten how to process the staff of life. This is a lie. The grain is not the enemy. The method is the enemy. Travel back 800 years to a peasant cottage in 12th century France. The air inside the dwelling is thick with smoke and the smell of fermenting rye. The peasant consumes nearly 1 kilogram of bread every single day. This is a dense, dark, heavy brick of sustenance. By modern medical standards, this massive intake of carbohydrates and gluten should render the peasant bloated, inflamed, and metabolically broken. Yet, the peasant possesses a digestive fortitude that would shame a modern athlete. The peasant works from sunrise to sunset, fueled by this single source of energy. There is no bloating. There is no brain fog. There is no gluten sensitivity. How is this possible? The difference lies in a single, invisible ingredient that the modern world has murdered in the name of profit. The difference is time. The difference is life. The medieval baker did not use a packet of instant dried granules from a factory. The medieval baker used a living entity, a bubbling, breathing, acidic colony of wild organisms that required daily feeding, daily care, and daily respect. This was the sourdough starter. This was not merely an ingredient. This was a biological partner. This was a domesticated pet that predated the house cat. The modern industrial bread process is a race against time. The factory demands speed. The factory demands consistency. To achieve this, the industry isolated a single strain of yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, chosen for one trait and one trait alone, aggressive gas production. This industrial yeast is a steroid-fueled sprinter. It inflates the dough in 60 minutes. It puffs up the gluten network like a balloon. But it does nothing else. It does not digest. It does not transform. It leaves the complex proteins of the wheat entirely intact. When the modern consumer eats this quick-rise bread, the stomach is forced to do the heavy lifting that the fermentation process should have done. The stomach panics. The immune system reacts. The body rejects the assault. Contrast this with the ancient method. The medieval sourdough starter was not a monoculture. It was a chaotic, beautiful ecosystem. It contained wild yeasts from the air, from the skin of the grapes, from the flour itself. But more importantly, it contained lactobacillus bacteria. These bacteria are the workers. These bacteria are the chemists. Over a fermentation period of 12, 18, or even 24 hours, the lactobacillus produces lactic acid and acetic acid. This acidification is the key. The acid activates dormant enzymes within the grain. These enzymes, specifically phytase, begin to break down the phytic acid, a microscopic padlock that binds up all the minerals in the wheat. Without this long fermentation, the iron, zinc, and magnesium in the bread remain locked away, passing through the body unabsorbed. Furthermore, this microscopic army pre-digests the gluten. The bacteria break down the long, difficult protein chains into simpler amino acids. By the time the medieval loaf enters the oven, the hard work of digestion has already been done in the mixing bowl. The bread is effectively partially digested before it even touches the tongue. This is why the medieval peasant could survive on bread alone. The bread was not just calories. The bread was a bioavailable delivery system for nutrients, unlocked by the patience of the sourdough culture. But this knowledge was inconvenient for the Industrial Revolution. You cannot bottle patience. You cannot sell time on a conveyor belt. And so, the starter was abandoned. The living culture was replaced by the chemical packet. The complex, sour, chewy, nutritious loaf was replaced by the sugary, airy, empty calorie foam. We traded 18 hours of biology for 2 hours of chemistry, and we paid for it with our health. Now, look at the gluten-free aisle. It is a monument to our failure. We have created a multi-billion-dollar industry to solve a problem that we created by forgetting how to bake. We blame the wheat, but the wheat is innocent. We have forgotten the ancient covenant between man and microbe. We have forgotten that bread is supposed to be alive until the moment it enters the fire. The tragedy is that this ancient technology is not lost. It is merely sleeping. In the back of a cupboard, in a dried scrap of dough, in the very air you breathe right now, the potential for this resurrection exists. The wild yeast is waiting. The lactobacillus is waiting. They do not need electricity. They do not need laboratories. They do not need commercial supply chains. They only need flour, water, and the one thing the modern world refuses to give: time. This investigation is not just about baking a loaf of bread. It is about reclaiming a lost biological heritage. It is about understanding that the stomach of the medieval peasant was not stronger than yours. Their technology was simply superior. Their technology was biological. Their technology was symbiotic. And the most shocking truth of all is that you can resurrect this technology in your own kitchen, today, with zero cost. You can revive the dead. You can bring back the ancient metabolism. The industry does not want you to know that the best bread in the world cannot be bought. It can only be grown. They do not want you to realize that you can opt out of the toxic cycle of processed grain. They want you to remain a consumer of their foam. But the path of the medieval survivor is different. The path of the survivor is to seize control of the food supply at the microscopic level. Have you ever felt that heaviness in your gut after a sandwich? Have you ever wondered why your grandmother's bread didn't make you sick? The answer is bubbling in a jar of water and flour, waiting for you to wake it up. This is not cooking. This is necromancy. This is the resurrection of the old ways. And it starts with understanding exactly why the modern loaf is a fraud. To understand the magnitude of the crime committed against our daily sustenance, we must step onto the floor of a modern industrial bakery. There is no smell of earth here. There is no scent of warm fermentation or the sweet tang of ripening grain. The air smells of sterile metal, heated lubricants, and ozone. This is not a kitchen. It is a chemical processing plant. The central villain in this story is a technique developed in 1961, known as the Corleywood bread process. This method was designed with a single, ruthless objective: to delete time from the equation. In the medieval era, the binding of water to flour was a slow, gentle courtship that took hours. The protein strands, the gluten, would unravel naturally, hydrating fully and forming a strong, digestible mesh. The modern process replaces this biological patience with mechanical violence. High-speed mixers thrash the dough with such terrifying kinetic energy that the hydration is forced into the grain in a matter of minutes. The temperature spikes so high from the friction that cooling jackets are required to keep the dough from cooking itself. This mechanical assault shreds the natural structure of the wheat. To compensate for this destruction, the industry must introduce a cocktail of additives that would be unrecognizable to a medieval miller. They add vital wheat gluten, a processed powder of pure protein, to force structure back into the shattered dough. They add enzymes derived from mold to keep the crumb artificially soft. They add emulsifiers like datem, diacetyl tartaric acid, ester of mono, and diglycerides to strengthen the dough so it can survive the brutal machinery. And often, they add azodicarbonamide, a chemical blowing agent also used in the manufacturing of yoga mats and shoe rubber, to bleach the flour and create an unnatural, airy texture. When you consume this product, you are eating a lie. Your body does not recognize it. The starch molecules, exploded by the high-speed mixing and rapid baking, are instantly accessible to your digestive enzymes. This results in a glycemic spike that hits your bloodstream with the violence of a candy bar. Your insulin soars. Your energy crashes. The unfermented gluten, tough and rubbery, sits in your gut like a stone, causing the immune system to launch an inflammatory attack. This is the modern failure. It is a failure of philosophy. We treated food as a construction material, prioritizing structural integrity and shelf stability over biological compatibility. We built a product that looks like bread, but acts like a slow-acting toxin. Now, let us strip away the stainless steel and the plastic packaging. Let us return to the wooden trough of the medieval household. Here, an entirely different scientific reality is at play. The medieval baker was not a chemist. They were a biologist. They did not rely on mechanical force. They relied on enzymatic hydrolysis. The sourdough starter, or levain, is not merely a rising agent. It is a battlefield. It is a dominant ecosystem where a specific alliance of organisms wages war against decay. The science here is profound. A healthy starter is a symbiotic colony of wild yeasts, often Candida malari or Saccharomyces exiguus, living in harmony with lactic acid bacteria, primarily Lactobacillus sanfrancisensis. In a commercial packet of yeast, the ratio is simple: billions of yeast cells, 0 bacteria. In a medieval starter, the bacteria outnumber the yeast by a ratio of 100 to 1. This is crucial. The yeast provides the lift, consuming simple sugars and releasing carbon dioxide to leaven the bread. But the bacteria are the guardians. They consume maltose, a sugar the yeast cannot eat, and excrete lactic acid and acetic acid. This acidification process drops the pH of the dough to around 3.5 or 4. This acidic environment is hostile to pathogenic bacteria. Salmonella, E. coli, and common molds cannot survive in the sour armor of the medieval dough. This is why a loaf of true sourdough bread, with its thick, caramelized crust, could sit on a peasant's table for a week or more without spoiling. The bread was its own preservative. It did not need calcium propionate or sorbic acid. It was protected by the natural byproducts of its own fermentation. But the miracle goes deeper than preservation. We must look at the molecular transformation known as proteolysis. During the long, cold nights of bulk fermentation, the lactobacillus bacteria produce enzymes that actively dismantle the gluten network. They do not destroy it, they modify it. They clip the toxic peptide bonds that trigger celiac-like reactions in sensitive individuals. They break down the FODMAP's fermentable carbohydrates that cause bloating and distress in modern guts. The bacteria are literally performing the first stage of digestion for you. Consider the thermal mass of the medieval oven. The wood-fired oven was built of stone and clay, materials with immense heat retention. When the dough was loaded, it was hit with a powerful, radiant heat that penetrated deep into the loaf. This created a rapid oven spring, maximizing the volume before the crust set. But more importantly, the intense bottom heat and the presence of steam, often generated by wiping the oven floor with a wet rag, facilitated the Maillard reaction. The crust did not just brown, it polymerized. The amino acids and sugars on the surface reacted to form a complex, thick, protective shell. This crust was not just for texture. It was a hermetic seal. It locked the moisture inside the crumb while keeping mold spores out. The modern industrial loaf has a soft, pale crust because it is baked in a convection oven designed for throughput, often bagged in plastic while still warm, trapping condensation and inviting mold. The medieval loaf was designed to be a survival ration. It was dense, it was sour, and it was practically indestructible. We must also address the raw material. The medieval peasant did not use all-purpose flour. That is a modern invention of pure starch, stripped of the germ and the bran, the very parts of the seed that contain the nutrients and the oils. They used stone-milled flour. The crushing action of the millstones rubbed the wheat germ oil into the flour particles. This oil is rich in vitamin E and flavor, but it goes rancid quickly. This forced the medieval baker to use fresh flour, full of life and enzymatic activity. Modern roller mills shear the wheat kernel apart, separating the stable starch from the nutritious but volatile oils. The result is a powder that can sit in a warehouse for 2 years, dead and inert. When you try to revive a starter using bleached, bromated, dead modern flour, you are fighting an uphill battle. You are trying to cultivate life in a sterile desert. But the resilience of the microbial world is shocking. Even in this white dust, there are sleeping spores. Even in the air of your sterile apartment, there is wild yeast hunting for a sugar source. The process of capturing this life is not an invention, it is a discovery. You are setting a trap. You are creating a specific environment, a mixture of flour and water that is welcoming to the organisms you want and deadly to the ones you don't. The first few days of creating a starter are a chaotic biological brawl. The mixture smells like old socks or vomit. This is the leukonostoc phase, where weak, opportunistic bacteria try to take hold. A modern person sees bubbles and thinks, "It's working." No, this is false life. A medieval baker would know to wait. They would know that the acidity must build up. They would keep feeding, keep discarding, waiting for the pH to drop. Eventually, the environment becomes too acidic for the invaders. They die off. And then, from the silence, the true kings emerge. The lactobacillus takes the throne. The wild yeast wakes up. The smell shifts from rot to ripe fruit, to beer, to yogurt. The culture has stabilized. It has become an immune system in a jar. This is the investigation phase of our journey. We have analyzed the crime scene of the modern bakery. We have identified the weapon, speed. We have identified the victim, our health. And we have uncovered the alibi of the ancient world, a partnership with the microscopic world that we foolishly dissolved. The science proves it. The physics of heat, the chemistry of acidification, and the biology of fermentation all point to one conclusion. We broke bread, and in doing so, we broke ourselves. Now, we must look at the evidence that proves this isn't just romantic nostalgia, but hard, quantifiable fact. Skeptics will claim that this is mere romanticism. They will argue that the medieval stomach was simply hardened by hardship, and that modern science has surpassed these primitive methods. But the data suggests otherwise. We do not need to rely on folklore. We can look at the cold, hard numbers produced by the highest levels of academic inquiry. A landmark study conducted by the Department of Soil, Plant and Food Sciences at the University of Bari in Italy provided the smoking gun. Researchers gathered patients with celiac disease, individuals for whom gluten is not just an irritant, but a violent poison. The scientists subjected wheat dough to different fermentation protocols. The control group used standard baker's yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, for a rapid 2-hour rise. The result was predictable. The gluten toxicity remained high, the peptide chains intact, the inflammatory potential unchanged. But then, they tested the ancient method. They utilized a specific cocktail of lactobacillus strains derived from traditional sourdough starters and allowed the fermentation to proceed for a full 24 hours. The results were staggering. The bacteria had hydrolyzed the gluten protein so thoroughly that the concentration of the toxic 33-mer peptide, the specific amino acid sequence that triggers the immune response, was reduced to almost undetectable levels. In clinical trials, some patients with significant gluten sensitivity were able to consume this fully fermented sourdough bread with zero adverse effects. The laboratory confirmed what the peasant knew intuitively. The grain must be tamed, before it is consumed. Further evidence lies in the Library of Life. In Street Vith, Belgium, there exists a fortress known as the Puratos Sourdough Library. This is not a museum of dead artifacts. It is a high-security vault maintained at a constant 4 degrees Celsius, housing over 100 of the world's most famous sourdough cultures. There are starters here that survived the gold rush in the pockets of Yukon miners. There are starters that fed soldiers in the trenches of World War I. There are cultures from Greece, Italy, and San Francisco that have been kept alive, fed, and propagated for generations. Genetic sequencing of these samples reveals a stunning diversity. A starter from a grandmother in Altamura, Italy, contains completely different bacterial strains than a starter from a bakery in Seattle. Yet, they all perform the same biological function. They all prove that this is not a fragile, fleeting chemical reaction. This is a robust biological lineage. These cultures have survived wars, famines, and migrations. They survived because they were valued. They were valued because they worked. The archaeological record provides the physical proof of this durability. Excavations of ancient Egyptian bakeries near the Giza pyramids have uncovered conical pottery molds encrusted with the DNA of ancient yeast and bacteria. But the most practical example comes from the Roman legions. A Roman soldier on the march did not carry packets of dried yeast. The soldier carried a desiccated scrap. This was a piece of the previous day's dough, rolled thin and left to dry in the sun until it was hard as a stone. In this state of cryptobiosis, the yeast and bacteria suspend their metabolic functions. They construct a protective shell, effectively shutting down to survive the lack of water. This dried chip could be carried in a dirty leather pouch for months. When the legion stopped to camp, the soldier would crumble the scrap into warm water and flour. Within hours, the Lazarus effect would occur. The organisms would wake, feed, and multiply. The dead stone would become a living culture. This was the ultimate survival technology, a renewable source of nutrition that required no supply chain. Now, the investigation moves from the laboratory to the countertop. The modern consumer must reclaim this power. This is the Lazarus Protocol. Creating or reviving a sourdough starter does not require a degree in microbiology, but it does require strict adherence to the laws of nature. The first variable is the substrate. Do not use bleached, all-purpose flour. Bleaching agents are oxidizers. They are designed to kill organic matter. Using bleached flour to start a culture is like trying to plant a forest on a parking lot. The aspirant must use organic whole rye flour or whole wheat flour. Rye is the cheat code. Rye flour is naturally packed with amylase enzymes and a higher load of wild yeast on the hull of the grain. It ferments vigorously and reliably. It provides a rich buffet of minerals that the young bacteria need to establish a foothold. The second variable is water. The tap water in a modern city is a chemical weapon against bacteria. It is dosed with chlorine or chloramine specifically to sterilize the water supply. If the student pours chlorinated water into the flour, the chlorine will indiscriminately murder the wild yeast and the lactobacillus before the colony can establish itself. The water must be filtered, or at the very least, boiled and left to cool so the chlorine can evaporate. The protocol begins with a 1-to-1 ratio. 50 grams of rye flour, 50 grams of warm water. Mix it into a paste. Cover it with a cloth that allows airflow but blocks dust and flies. Then, the most difficult step for the modern mind. Wait. Do nothing for 24 hours. On day 2, the mixture may look inert, or it may smell foul. This is the danger zone. The smell of old cheese or vomit indicates that leuconostoc bacteria, the bad guys, are blooming. They proliferate faster than the yeast in the early stages. The novice throws the mixture away in disgust. The expert knows this is part of the war. The expert feeds the culture again. Fresh flour, fresh water. This dilutes the bad bacteria and adds fresh food. By day 4 or day 5, a shift occurs. The pH drops. The environment becomes acidic. The leuconostoc die off, unable to survive the acid bath. The lactobacillus take command. The smell changes instantly. It shifts from rot to ripe fruit to apple cider to a pleasant, yeasty tang. Bubbles appear throughout the matrix. The mixture rises and falls rhythmically. The culture is born. Once established, the maintenance is simple. The starter is a pet. It must be fed. If the student neglects the jar for weeks in the fridge, a dark, black liquid will form on top. This is called hooch. It is alcohol produced by the stressed yeast. It is a scream for help. The modern consumer sees black liquid and thinks mold, thinks poison, and throws it in the trash. The medieval baker knows this is simply hunger. Pour off the hooch, add fresh flour and water, and the colony will rebound within hours. It is nearly impossible to kill a mature starter with neglect. You can starve it, dry it, freeze it, and it will bounce back. The only thing that truly kills it is heat cooking it, or poison, like bleach or mold. Let us discuss the mathematics of this rebellion. A packet of commercial yeast costs a trivial amount, perhaps a few cents, but it is a single-use product. You are tethered to the store. You are a subscriber to the industrial yeast service. A sourdough starter is a capital investment. You pay for the flour once to create it. From that moment on, you possess a perpetual motion machine of leavening. You can take a spoonful of that starter, give it to a neighbor, and they have their own factory. They give it to 10 people. The factory multiplies. The control of production decentralizes. Consider the cost of a true artisan sourdough loaf at a hip modern bakery. It sells for $7, maybe $10. The ingredients flour, water, salt cost less than 50 cents. The markup is for the time and for the magic of the starter. By maintaining your own culture, you are capturing that value. You are converting pennies of grain into dollars of nutrition. You are bypassing the medical costs of poor digestion. You are bypassing the premium pricing of health food. This practical application is not just about baking bread. It is about observing the biological reality of the world. When you hold a jar of active starter, you are holding a living civilization. You can see the bubbles rise as the colony breathes. You can feel the warmth generated by their metabolic activity. You are witnessing the same biological engine that powered the construction of the pyramids and the cathedrals of Europe. You have taken a wild, invisible force from the air and domesticated it. You have turned the chaotic microbial world into a tool for human survival. This is the essence of the medieval way. It is not about suffering. It is about mastery. It is about understanding that nature provides the solution, if you have the patience to listen. We often look back at the medieval world with a sense of arrogant pity. We see their mud huts, their lack of plumbing, and their short life expectancies, and we congratulate ourselves on our progress. We tell ourselves that we are the masters of the universe because we have split the atom and mapped the human genome. But in the quiet corner of a kitchen, watching a mixture of flour and water bubble with life, that arrogance begins to crumble. The medieval baker did not have a microscope. They did not know the Latin names for lactobacillus or Saccharomyces, but they possessed a wisdom that we have discarded. They understood, fundamentally, that they were not separate from nature. They understood that to survive, they had to collaborate with the invisible forces around them. They were not primitive bunglers. They were masters of applied biology. They were practical physicists who used heat, time, and fermentation to unlock the energy of the sun trapped within the grain. The modern world is built on the illusion of separation. We believe we can bypass the laws of nature with technology. We believe we can cheat time with chemistry. We believe we can eat dead food and remain alive. The sourdough starter exposes this lie. It teaches us that there are no shortcuts. You cannot force the culture to ripen faster than its biology allows. You cannot bully the bacteria into submission. You must wait. You must observe. You must serve. In return, the culture serves you. It transforms the indigestible into the nutritious. It turns the simple into the sublime. This is a relationship of reciprocity, a concept alien to the modern consumer mindset of extraction and disposal. When you buy a loaf of plastic-wrapped bread from the supermarket, you are engaging in a transaction of dependence. You are the passive recipient of a corporate product. You have no idea where the wheat came from, how it was milled, or what chemicals were used to bleach it. You are eating blind, but when you bake with your own starter, you are reclaiming your sovereignty. You become the producer. You become the chemist. You become the guardian of your own sustenance. This act is small, yes. It is just a loaf of bread, but it is also a revolutionary act. It is a declaration that you are willing to work for your health. It is a rejection of the convenience culture that is slowly poisoning us. This jar of bubbling paste on your counter is more than just a rising agent. It is a connection to your ancestors. It is the same biological lineage that fed the serfs of Europe, the builders of the pyramids, and the pioneers of the New World. By keeping it alive, you are maintaining a continuous chain of life that stretches back thousands of years. You are stepping out of the frenetic, disposable timeline of the 21st century and stepping into the deep, slow time of history. You are aligning your pulse with the rhythm of the microbial world. The medieval way is not about rejecting electricity or medicine. It is about recognizing what we have lost in the rush for modernity. We have lost the texture of life. We have lost the smell of real fermentation. We have lost the satisfaction of creating something with our own hands that cannot be replicated by a machine. We have become consumers of calories rather than nourishers of bodies. So, here is the challenge. Do not just watch this video and nod in agreement. Do not just scroll to the next distraction. Go to your kitchen, find a jar, find some flour and water. Mix them together. Watch the chaos of the first few days. Smell the rot, endure the doubt, and then wait for the resurrection. Wait for that moment when the bubbles rise and the sweet, sharp scent of life fills the jar. When you pull that first loaf of true sourdough from the oven, heavy and hot, with a crust that sings as it cools, you will understand. You will taste the difference between a product made for profit and a food made for life. You will realize that the best technology on Earth isn't a microchip or a chemical additive. It is a single-celled organism that has been waiting for you to wake it up. Stop eating the foam. Stop trusting the factory. Become a keeper of the culture. Revive the dead. And in doing so, you might just revive yourself.